Welcome to another deep dive with us. Today we are going to be taking a look at research.
Research, yes.
And we're going to be looking at research in a couple of different ways.
Yeah.
We have some excerpts from a YouTube transcript.
Yeah.
From a YouTube video that discusses a very humorous academic disagreement.
Yes.
Between two professors.
Two professors who disagree.
And the crux of the matter is
the age-old question.
The age-old
chicken or the egg?
Yeah, the chicken or the egg.
Yes.
So, and then alongside that, we have some excerpts from some information about research that defines research.
Yes.
Outlines the research process, talks about different types of research and the importance of research.
Right.
So we are basically taking these two things and we are going to be kind of extracting from them.
Yes.
The core insights about research itself.
That's exactly right.
So we're not going to spend all day talking about chickens and eggs.
Absolutely not, although it is an interesting question.
It is an interesting question.
It is.
And actually, you know, we're not going to be super academic about this, but I think there is a real connection between the way that we all look for answers in our daily lives.
Yes.
And the way that
this is such a good point.
Scientists and academics, you know, like look for definitive answers.
Yeah.
So like even if you're...
It's all research.
Yeah. Yeah. Even if you're reading through reviews on Amazon.
That's right.
To decide, you know...
Before you buy a new...
Which Bluetooth speaker to buy.
Yeah. A new gadget or a...
You're conducting research.
You are absolutely conducting research.
Yeah. So you're using a methodology.
You have an investigative approach.
Yeah.
It may not be as formal as an academic study, but it is research nonetheless.
And even something like, you know, figuring out the best route to work to avoid traffic.
Absolutely.
You're using a system.
Right. You're consulting sources. You're looking at data.
Yeah. You're looking at Google Maps. You're looking at, you know, Waze.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so yeah, I just think that's
so interesting.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I wanted to point out. From this
this hilarious debate.
This hilarious academic debate is
yes.
You know, even in their kind of back and forth banter.
Yes.
They're using terms
that
are
central to
serious research.
Like, I mean, it jumped out at you.
Well, like the professor will say something like,
yes,
the data is irrefutable.
The data is irrefutable.
You know, or I've done extensive research on this matter.
Extensive research.
You know, or
yes,
I've built studies.
I've read the literature.
Yes.
Right.
And so what we're seeing there is this...
The bedrock of...
Like fundamental...
Needing evidence.
Need for proof.
Right there.
Yeah.
And that's what's fascinating here. Is that even in this clearly playful context?
Right.
Right. It's not a life or death situation here, but the moment somebody emphasizes, I have proof, I've looked into this.
Right.
They're hitting on that fundamental need for evidence.
Right.
To make your argument credible.
Right. And then the other professor will fire back with a
critique.
You know, like a critique of the methodology.
Yes.
You know, saying things like...
An investigative approach.
Yeah, the investigative approach was flawed.
The
collection of data was not systematic.
There was a large margin of error.
Right?
Right. And
then they're also challenging the idea of a definitive conclusion.
Right. And what this points to is that research is iterative.
Yes.
Right.
That was something that jumped out at me too.
Yeah.
It's like...
What do we mean by that?
Well, what we mean by that is that, like... You know, sometimes we think of research as like, okay...
You do your research.
And you come to a conclusion.
And that's it. You've got the answer.
We have the answer.
And this is it forever.
This is the answer.
Right.
But in reality...
It's more nuanced than that.
Yeah, it's more nuanced. Yeah. It's more of a process.
Yeah, and new information
comes to light.
Can be discovered. And so...
You may have to revisit conclusions that you thought were... definitive,
right, and
based on the new information,
and even the conclusions can change and evolve,
and the understanding that that's part of the process is important,
right?
That's what makes it a process.
So
you can't just say, "I'm done."
Right.
The research is over.
Right.
We have the answer.
Right, and that also ties into the idea that research is driven by strong conviction.
Yes, by passion.
Yeah.
By a desire to find the truth.
Yeah.
So, you know.
And these guys they're not pulling any punches.
And the professors in this debate embody that.
They're using very strong language.
They do. They're very passionate.
Like, that is preposterous.
Preposterous. You're oblivious to the fact that you are wrong. Yes.
Yeah.
Very strong language.
Strong language.
But it shows that
It shows that they care.
They care about
getting it right.
About what they're researching.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know what? That raises a really important point.
Yeah.
About the language of research.
Yeah.
Which, you know.
So let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah. The language takeaway segment of this YouTube video does a great job of breaking down some key vocabulary.
Yeah.
And so
And I think those are applicable.
Yeah.
You know.
Let's look at those.
To all forms of research.
Yeah. So the first word they define is irrefutable. Irrefutable.
Irrefutable.
And that means something that cannot be denied.
Cannot be denied, right?
Absolutely true.
Right. So this goes back to that idea of
strong evidence.
You need solid evidence
to support a claim.
To back up.
If you're going to say something is irrefutable,
yes,
you better have the goods to back it up.
Yes. And then they talk about the word flawed.
Flawed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which means
having problems or mistakes.
Right.
Right.
And that goes back to the investigative approach.
To the critique of the investigative approach.
Right. And how the other professor was saying, like,
right.
Well, you didn't do it right. Your methodology was flawed.
Your research was flawed.
Yeah.
Right.
And then the next word is systematic.
Systematic.
Systematic, which means...
It means following a process.
Right.
A certain order.
Right.
Organized.
So, like, the opposite.
Right. The opposite of the unsystematic data collection.
Yeah. They were talking about that.
Yeah.
So, and then we have a great word, preposterous.
Preposterous.
Which means utterly absurd or ridiculous.
Right.
And this one really highlights the intensity of their disagreement.
Right.
Even though the subject matter is somewhat lighthearted.
Right.
Right.
You know.
And then we have oblivious.
Oblivious.
Which means unaware.
Yeah.
And this is a word you want to be careful of.
Right.
Because it can be used to accuse somebody of intentionally overlooking something.
Right.
But in research, it's often the case that somebody is simply unaware of some vital piece of information or an alternative explanation.
Right. So
that would totally change their conclusion.
It's not always...
Right. It's not always malicious.
Malicious, right.
It's just sometimes people are unaware.
Yeah. And then they go on to define some key phrases like extensive research.
Right.
Which just means...
A lot of research.
Yeah. Having really studied and looked things up.
Yeah. Right.
Conclusive evidence.
Conclusive evidence.
That's the kind of proof that's so strong.
That should lead to a...
It should lead to a final decision.
Final decision.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then we have investigative approach.
Investigative approach.
Which is just...
the way you investigate.
The way you go about exploring...
a problem.
A question or problem.
Yeah.
And then finally... definitive conclusion.
Definitive conclusion.
A judgment that is intended to be final.
Okay.
And not open to further debate.
Right. So what's so interesting about all these terms is they're not... But
not just academic jargon.
Oh,
right.
They're the essential vocabulary.
They're fundamental.
For discussing research findings and how the research was conducted.
Right.
In a precise and meaningful way.
And they really help to elevate the conversation.
They help elevate the conversation. They allow researchers to communicate.
Their methods, their results, their interpretations with clarity.
Right.
Even when
they disagree.
As we saw with our professors, there's a strong difference of opinion.
Right. Okay, so let's move beyond these these professors.
These feathery friends.
And their feathery friends.
Yeah.
And talk about, like...
what is research?
What is research?
Like, formally speaking.
Yeah.
Why
should we care?
This matter to you?
Like, why does research...
Yeah.
Why is research important in our daily lives?
Well, at its core, research is a systematic process of asking questions.
Okay.
And trying to find reliable answers.
Okay.
It's about actively seeking new information.
Okay.
Digging deeper into specific problems.
Okay.
And ultimately trying to solve them.
So it's really the engine of how we move forward.
It is.
As a society, as a culture.
Absolutely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, research allows us to understand history.
Yeah.
Right. Understanding the journey that has brought us to where we are today.
Yeah.
It fuels advancements in medicine.
Right.
Leading to new treatments and ways to improve health. It drives technological innovation. Shaping how we live and work and connect.
Yeah. And
it even helps us understand something as vast and complex as the universe.
As the universe, yeah.
So, without research,
Yeah.
So much of what we know and what we often take for granted simply wouldn't exist.
Right. So can you give some specific examples of how research plays out in different fields that might,
certainly,
resonate with our listeners?
So in science and medicine, you have researchers conducting carefully designed experiments to understand how diseases work, to develop new ways to treat them.
Right.
So think about the ongoing global efforts to combat viruses or find more effective cancer therapies.
Right.
In historical research, scholars meticulously examine old documents and artifacts to piece together a picture of past societies and events, maybe uncovering new details about ancient civilizations. Social researchers delve into human behavior and how societies function.
Yeah. And that can then inform things like educational programs or
how we design better educational programs or understand how people respond to different kinds of information.
Right. What about the business world?
The business world, that's where market research comes into play.
Okay.
So businesses use surveys, interviews, testing to really understand what customers need and want.
Right.
And then this research guides the development of better products and services that actually meet those needs.
That are more effective.
Yeah. And even in educational research is constantly looking for more effective ways
to improve the
teach and to improve the learning experience.
Yeah. And so
you also have environmental research tackling critical issues like climate change and pollution and medical research specifically focused on finding new ways to prevent and treat illnesses.
Right. So the scope is
incredibly broad.
Really, really broad.
It really is.
Yeah. Okay. So so it's clear that research is happening all around us.
Research is happening all the time.
All the time.
All around us.
Yeah.
But is there like a typical process that researchers follow to ensure
there is
they're finding their structured step-by-step method to maximize accuracy and reliability?
Okay, so walk us through that.
So it usually begins with choosing a topic.
Okay.
And a key thing to note here is that the topic should be specific, clear, and something meaningful to investigate.
Okay, so don't just say, I'm going to research the environment.
Right. Instead of a very broad topic like the environment, researcher might focus on the impact of microplastics on local river ecosystems.
Right. Much more narrow.
Much more specific.
Yeah. So what's the next step?
The next step is gathering information.
Gathering information. Okay.
So this involves looking at what is already known about the topic by consulting reliable sources.
Okay.
So things like academic books and journals, reputable websites from established institutions, interviews with experts in the field, and previous studies that have been done.
Okay.
So emphasizing the importance of trustworthy sources.
Right. So like government
reports, university studies, things that you can really rely on.
Yeah.
So once a researcher has a good grasp of the existing knowledge, the next step is often formulating
specific research
questions that will guide their investigation.
So instead of saying how does diet affect
people,
you would say how does the consumption of
processed sugar affect sleep patterns in teenagers. Right. Much more specific.
So much more specific. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And so that kind of leads them down.
That guides the research.
A very specific path.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
So following the development of these focused questions, researchers often conduct experiments, test their ideas, or collect data through surveys, observations, or other methods.
Right.
So think of a pharmaceutical company testing a new drug in a clinical trial.
Right.
Or a social scientist conducting a survey to understand people's opinions on a particular issue.
Right.
After gathering all this data, the critical stage of analyzing it begins. So looking for patterns, trends, and any significant findings that emerge.
Okay.
This analysis then leads to the researchers drawing conclusions, deciding what the data actually means in relation to their initial questions and how those findings might be used.
Right.
And finally, the research process typically ends with sharing the results through reports, publications in journals or presentations, which contributes to the broader body of knowledge in that field.
So it sounds like a very careful and methodical way
It
of
is.
going about things.
It is.
Yeah. Are there any common challenges or difficulties
Absolutely.
that people conducting research often encounter?
One significant challenge,
Okay.
and something important for you to be aware of
Right.
when you're looking at information,
Yeah.
is finding sources that are both accurate and reliable.
Yeah.
So not everything you read online or hear
Right.
is necessarily trustworthy. And some sources may present biased and incorrect information.
Yeah.
So researchers need to be very careful
Yeah.
and often cross-reference information from multiple sources.
Right.
Another common hurdle is often the significant time and financial cost involved,
Right.
particularly for scientific research that might require specialized equipment and large teams of people.
Right.
So securing funding for research projects from government agencies,
Right.
universities, or private organizations can be a constant challenge.
Right. Okay. So
Yeah.
you mentioned earlier how we all engage in a form of research
We do.
in our everyday lives.
In our everyday lives.
So could you expand on that a little bit?
Certainly. So research isn't an activity reserved
Right.
just for experts in labs or universities.
Right.
It's something we all do, often without even consciously labeling it as such.
Right.
So think about the last time you read customer reviews
Right.
before deciding to buy something online. Or when you compared different routes on a map app
Right.
to find the quickest way to your destination.
Yeah.
Parents research different schools
Right.
before deciding where to enroll their children.
Right.
And doctors constantly research
Yeah.
the latest medical findings
To provide
to provide the best possible care.
the best possible care.
Yeah, so the internet has made accessing
Yeah.
vast amounts of information
Incredibly easy.
incredibly easy.
But it also means we have to be
But it also means
more discerning.
that we need to be even more critical
Right.
in evaluating the reliability
Of the sources.
of the sources we find.
Yeah. So those fundamental skills
Yeah.
of a good researcher,
Yeah.
like being able to ask
Ask relevant questions.
relevant questions,
Find information.
find the information,
Answer those questions. Yeah.
and critically evaluate the trustworthiness.
Critically evaluate.
I've said that information.
Yeah, are so valuable.
Are incredibly valuable.
In our daily lives.
Daily lives.
It's not just in formal academic settings.
Right.
Right. Okay.
So as we look ahead,
yeah.
how do you think the world of research is going to evolve in the coming years?
Technology is undoubtedly going to play an even bigger role.
Right.
Artificial intelligence, for example,
Yeah.
is already dramatically speeding up the process of analyzing large data sets,
Right.
allowing researchers to identify patterns and insights
Right.
much more quickly than ever before.
So it's really expediting
The process.
that process.
Yeah.
We're also seeing the development of increasingly sophisticated tools and technologies
Right.
being applied across various fields. So
Really-
like advanced imaging in medical research
Yeah.
to sophisticated sensors in environmental science
Right.
and new instruments for space exploration.
Okay, so it's really...
And in education,
Yeah.
research is going to drive
Yeah.
innovation in online learning platforms.
Yeah. And personalized teaching methods.
Right.
So it's going to be a continuous cycle of building upon existing knowledge
Right.
and pushing the boundaries of
Yeah.
what we understand about the world around us.
Okay, so let's bring everything
Yeah.
that we've talked about today
Let's bring it all together.
together for our listener.
Yeah.
What are the main takeaways you would want them to remember?
Research is a fundamental and systematic way of asking questions
Right.
and seeking reliable answers
Okay.
that underpins our understanding of the world.
Right.
And it's not just some abstract academic exercise. It's a very practical
Right.
and essential tool
For solving problems.
for solving problems and making informed decisions
in all
aspects of your life.
aspects of life.
From understanding complex scientific findings
Right.
to making everyday choices.
Making everyday choices.
And it emphasizes the importance of having clear methods,
Yeah.
critically evaluating the information you encounter,
Right.
and always being open to learning more.
So whether you find yourself pondering a philosophical puzzle
Yeah.
or trying to figure out, the best way to bake
The best way to bake a new recipe.
a new recipe, you are engaging
You're engaging.
in that fundamental
It's a fundamental process.
of research.
And research.
Yeah.
Asking questions, seeking answers.
Right. So the next time you're digging for information,
Right.
just remember that
Participating.
we're participating in this incredibly important
Human endeavor.
Human endeavor.
The pursuit of knowledge.
Yeah.
That drives discovery.
That drives discovery.
And shapes our understanding.
And shapes our understanding.
Of everything.
Of everything, right?
Oh, yeah.
So here's a final thought for you to consider.
Yes.
Given the sheer volume of information.
Right.
That's now readily available.
Yeah.
At our fingertips.
At your fingertips.
What do you think is the most critical skill?
That's a great question.
For effectively navigating and utilizing
research.
Research in your daily life.
Yeah.
It's definitely something to think about.
Something to ponder.
Thanks for diving deep with us today.
Thanks for joining us.